We know now that the Liberal government will table their budget on November 14th. It's the first look at Mark Carney's spending plan since he became Prime Minister. Concern is mounting about the Canadian economy, battered by U.S. tariffs. Carney has repeatedly vowed to rein in spending, while at the same time spending billions in areas like infrastructure, defence, and a new housing plan. The Liberals say it's all about strengthening the economy, but they warn it will add up to a substantial deficit, even bigger than last year's $62 billion figure. François-Philippe Champagne is the Minister of Finance. Nice to see you again, Minister.
It's a pleasure to join you from Copenhagen today.
The government put off tabling a budget in the spring, as we know, and we were for months expecting the budget in October. Steve McKinnon told me that as recently as last week. What changed to push it to November?
Well, it was just a better date in terms of the parliamentary calendar. So that we give time to parliamentarians then to be able to be in their writing. So that was really in line with, the work of the House. And the fact that we presented in November also, there were questions at the beginning when it should be. And I think, what people have seen, what happened over the summer, so many things have happened, the NATO summit, what we have decided to do with respect to supporting families, on housing, on building the economy. So I think it's just a good moment also in time in terms of sequencing, because this is before provincial budgets will be done. Mm-hmm. It's also before parliamentarians will vote on main estimates.
How big are we expecting the deficit? Because as you well know, we were talking about sort of $60 billion. And as you rightly said, we've seen a lot of big promises since then, plus the uncertainty from the United States and other factors. So $100 billion now seems to be in the realm of possibility. What should Canadians be prepared for, Minister?
Well, Canadians should be prepared for a generational investment. I've been talking, this is like 1945. This is the moment where Canada needs to reinvent itself, like we did. Our grandparents did it, our parents did it in some way. It's our turn, because this is the time where we need to build the economy of the 21st century. So this is going to require collective effort. But people understand, with everything that has happened in the world, that we need to rethink the Canadian economy. We need to open new market. That's part of the reason why I'm in Europe and the Prime Minister went to Mexico. We need to diversify our economy. We need to diversify a number of sectors of our economy. So for me, it's more like a down payment in the future prosperity of Canada. We need to make that generational investments in order to bring, to be less dependent, more resilient, and bring prosperity across our nation.
Okay, so does that mean then that you and the government don't have guardrails or anchors to rein in spending and the size of the deficit, that there is no parameter you're working within, because that has been the case previously?
Well, we've been very clear. We have a number of them. One of them is that we said, we're going to balance the operating budget over the next 3 years. So that is very significant, because that's going to give confidence to Canadians and the markets that we want to have our operational spending under control. And we said also that our deficit, the ratio of deficit to GDP is going to reduce over the period of time of the fiscal framework. So that is also a very significant message to Canadians. But also the fact that, the way we're going to be presenting the budget, where we make a distinction between spending and investments. People understand, you buy a house, you invest, you go buy grocery, you spend. Somehow we're going to be presenting something to Canadians that say, we're going to reduce our spending. So at the time where we need to ensure the pivot in the Canadian economy, something that we've not seen since probably 1945, we're going to do more investment so that we can have a resilient economy. We're going to support our workers in key sector of economy. We're going to help a number of industry pivot and bring Canada at a place where we can have prosperity for generations to come.
Just so I understand and so Canadians understand, does a generational investment, a change that we haven't seen perhaps in a lifetime, mean that we are also going to see a deficit number unlike anything we have seen in a long time?
Well, I'd say, people expect that an investment like that, which is generational, will require us to borrow in order to make that pivot. This is a natural pivot, but people also understand that you have a return on investment, that the investment, and that's why I think, Rosemary, it's so important to present that in a way that Canadians can understand. When you talk about expenses, so people will see, okay, are these people serious when it comes to expenses? And That's why we launched this expenditure review to make sure we're more efficient, provide better services to Kenya, and at the same time tell them what are the things we are going to invest in, and talk about infrastructure, project of national interest, the type of things that are going to make the Kenyan economy more resilient. So in fact, for me, this is even more transparent than before, because if you're a Canadian now, you look at that and you say, okay, I get it. These guys are doing that with respect to expenses. And at the same time, they're making these investments. So not only this generation, but future generation can benefit from this new economy we need to create in Canada.
The American ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, seems to be very alarmed at the way Canadians are speaking about the United States. He particularly this week criticized politicians like you, who just this week have said that we are in a trade war. He says that's a dangerous place to go. Why do you think the ambassador is saying these kinds of things? And what is it that you think he doesn't get about the state of the relationship between Canada and the U.S.?
Well, listen, the United States is and will always remain our strategic trading partner. You know, geography has made us neighbors. History has made us trading partners. We are allies. We're always going to continue. What we're just saying is that perhaps over decades we have become too dependent on the U.S. market, and now we need to be more resilient. That's why, for example, I'm here in Europe to make sure that we build relationship, the same thing that the Prime Minister did with respect to Mexico. So we are always going to work with our American friends. Actually, listen, we work all the time with our American friends. We appreciate, we work with them. But at the same time, you know, there's something that the Prime Minister said. It's also our time to make sure that, you know, we redesign the Canadian economy to be more resilient. And I think that should be a good thing. This is our moment where we said, we will continue to do that together. We like trading together. By the way, we're the largest customer to the United States. We buy more from the U.S. than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. So we're always going to be trading partners. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we protect the sector that have been affected. We need to make sure we diversify our economy. We need to make sure we diversify our market.
But Minister, are we in a trade war with the United States? Obviously, you believe that. That is, you believe that there is a trade war happening. Well, I would
say the tariff have been impacting a number of workers and sectors in Canada like we have not seen in a very long time or ever. So obviously this is deeply felt in Canada. You know, if you're in the steel sector, things are tough. If you're in the aluminum sector, things are tough. But it's also incumbent for us as political leader in this country to make sure that, you know, we reassure people that we'll be there for them, that we build the economy of the future, that we build new trading relationship with partners around the world.
And I won't belabor this, but it is almost like the United States, or the ambassador anyway, doesn't seem to understand who started this, who put the tariffs in place.
And it's not just Canada, I would say, Rosemary.
Sure,
I mean, what we've seen over the summer, you know, the world trading order has changed. The world economic order has changed significantly. It had an impact on Canada, an impact on other nations. Sure. But, you know, like the Prime Minister said, there's so much we can do to ourselves to make sure we are more resilient, and taking the step and moving from vision to action, taking step, you know, Canadians have told us, help us with the cost of living, build more houses, build the economy. That's what we've done, you know, focusing on cost of living, focusing on housing, building trading relationship, because at the end, we need to take care of our own economy, and that's what we're doing.
So I'll just end on you being in Copenhagen, because that is also what you're doing. You are looking for opportunity to strengthen trading relationships. You are looking for new partnerships. You're looking for new investment. What kind of conversations are you having about making that shift? Is it working? Do people also see Canada as a place for investment?
Well, it's great that we can bring a transatlantic voice to the finance ministers meeting in Europe. It's one of the first time in the history that Canada has been invited at this table, and it's telling that it's the only non-European country. The others, which are not part of the European Union, that have been invited is Norway, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom. And I saw colleagues in the hall, and they were very complimentary to Canada, because I think that our European friends value very much the transatlantic relationship. And I always say in that relationship, there's two poles. There's the United States, but there's also Canada. And at a time like that, I think the voice of Canada, also because we have the presidency of the G7, it's a voice which is welcome. And for me, for Canada, it's a great opportunity for our voice to resonate in front of the 27 nations of Europe and really talk about Canada, what we've been doing in Canada, how we can be a partner when it comes to energy security, how we can be a supplier of choice when it comes to critical minerals, talking about opening markets. So for me, it's just a great opportunity. And it just happened that as the Prime Minister was in Mexico, we were able to also present our case here in Europe. So it just, say that our plan is being put in action and that people welcome the voice of Canada.
Minister, always nice of you to make the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When I left, there was a Liberal Prime Minister who was making excuses about breaking promises, running massive deficits, costs, crime, chaos were all out of control. And whereas today, we have a Liberal Prime Minister breaking promises, making excuses, running massive deficits with costs, crime, and chaos out of control.
This past week marked Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's return to Parliament after his summer by-election win. And with the leader back inside the House of Commons, Conservatives are ready to get to work on their priorities for the fall sitting. Poilievre says that includes some reaching across the aisle to work with parties when possible. Andrew Scheer is the Conservative House Leader. Nice to see you.
Great to be here.
You've never been on this program, so I'm delighted to have you.
Well, thanks very much.
Good of you to make the time. First week back in the House, and Pierre Poilievre, obviously your boss, the leader, back in the House too. And I think a conversation about, yes, how much you're going to oppose the government, but also where you might be able to work together. Do you see any common terrain at this stage?
Well, we'll wait and see. I mean, it's great having Pierre back. If you think about it, in the last Parliament, Pierre won the debates on all the big issues. Liberal deficits causing inflation, Liberal catch and release bail laws causing crime and chaos in our streets. Now we see the Liberals having to kind of copy and paste Conservative ideas, or at least Conservative messages on things.
Sure.
And so what we're hopeful for is if they're serious, if they actually will say, okay, we will undo the Liberal laws on bail changes, then obviously we would support that. If they take elements of our platform as it relates to tax relief or getting government out of the way of major projects, then we would support that. But if they try to kind of craft, kind of sew on some of their Liberal ideology that has proven to fail in the past, then obviously we'll have to oppose that and highlight that for Canadians.
And there has been some, I think, copy-paste, and we'll talk about those instances and why they may not make sense for you. But just so I'm understanding, is there a possibility you could support a Liberal budget? Like, how will you determine whether a whole budget is worth supporting? Because in that case, there's a lot of different factors, I would imagine.
Yeah, and of course we will have to wait and see what's in the budget before we make a decision on that.
But you will consider it, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well,
you'll look at it.
Well, we look at everything before we make a decision as to whether or not we're going to support or oppose. It's how we deal with legislation. That's how we deal with budgets. I will say that I believe it's fair to hold Mark Carney to the standard that he set for himself.
Sure.
And during the campaign, he put in black and white in a written commitment to Canadians that he would cap the deficit at $62 billion. He did that knowing what Trump's tariffs were like, and knowing what the previous Liberal government had done to the economy in terms of inflation and deficits. So that's the commitment that he made to Canadians when he was asking for their vote.
Right.
I think it's fair to hold the government to account for that.
As you know well, though, things have changed. The tariff situation has gotten somewhat worse in terms of sectorals.
Promised he'd fix that.
Yeah, that, for sure.
He was the guy you hire in a crisis.
For sure, and he also made a $9 billion commitment in defense. So he's put promises, expensive promises on top of things since that commitment. So if the deficit is, let's say, $100 billion, which I think people are putting on the table as possible, that's far too big for Conservatives. Is the red line the 62 that Mark Carney himself made, or what is the red line for Conservatives in terms of a deficit?
Well, I believe that we will really have to go through the budget and make that determination when we can take everything into account. You're
not going to put a red line on it.
I think it's a fair question to ask after we've seen the budget, and we can kind of hold everything up in context. But the context that we believe it's fair to remind Canadians is that, yes, Mark Carney has made some new announcements. He's announced $13 billion for a new housing bureaucracy that still won't build the homes that Canadians need to see home prices come down. So when it comes to just giving him an excuse because he's made some big ticket spending announcements in line with the previous Liberal government, I don't believe that that's what he promised Canadians that he would do during the election campaign. I think it's really important, especially we're just a few months after the election.
Yep.
I believe it's absolutely fair to say you knew what was coming.
Sure.
You knew what the relationship was like with the United States. You
Sure.
knew what the flight of investment in Canadians' economy and the Canadian economy was already underway, and you made that commitment to Canadians on that deficit number. I think it's fair to hold them to that.
One of the things that we're also going to see in that budget, and yes, we'll see what it looks like, is they're going to separate things, as you know. So it's operational on one side and spending investment on the other. I would suggest that is a way to make things look perhaps rosier. When you see that, do you think that is going to be convincing to Canadians that they are indeed investing in the economy as opposed to chalking up more of a deficit?
Well, we'll have to see what kind of voodoo budgeting Mark Carney actually comes to the House of Commons with, because there already is a well-established accounting principle that provincial and federal governments and private corporations use for what counts as a capital investment and how that is budgeted. That already exists. That already exists in the Canadian budgetary system for decades.
This is modeled after the United Kingdom, from what I understand.
If he's going to bring these types of ideas over, then he has to explain exactly what he means. Because when I go to my banker, if I go to someone who, when I have to renew my mortgage, I can't argue for a lower interest rate because I can say, well, I've paid off my line of credit with my credit card. It's still debt. It still has to be paid for by Canadian taxpayers, and it still is debt that the Canadian government has to pay the interest on.
Sure.
So you as the taxpayer will spend more and more of your tax dollar just paying interest on debt to bankers and bondholders. That is unsustainable in the long run. That's what caused the inflation and interest rate crisis that we just got through in the Trudeau years. We don't want to see a repeat of that.
Let's talk about an area where it might be easier to find common ground: bail reform. I know that your leader gave a speech this past week about 3 strikes, you're out. That does not seem to be on the table for the government. They are talking about ways to give more resources to provinces to try to help the judicial system run better. What has to be in the bail reform? Because everyone, including the Prime Minister, agrees that changes are needed.
Well, I think it's fair to remind your viewers that it was Liberal changes to the bail system that caused this.
That is fair.
They passed a law that almost kind of forced judges to grant bail as a matter of a default position, even for
They looked for easier options,
even for dangerous and repeat offenders. So what I would love to see from this Liberal government, Sean Fraser voted in favor of all those changes when he was in the Trudeau cabinet. I'd like to see an apology to the Canadian people whose lives were shattered due to violent crime committed by people that this government set free. That would be a great starting point. Secondly, I think if it's a simple reversal of that law, that's obviously something we could support. We've called for that.
So if it doesn't go as far as 3 strikes, you're out, that would still be a step in the right direction.
I think it's fair to say that we will vote in favor of things that are improvements on the status quo.
Right.
And what the Liberals created with their changes from the last Parliament has created a terrible situation. So anything that improves on that, I think it's fair to say we would be open to supporting. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what's in the legislation. But it is also true that we have put forward common sense ideas to tackle the dangerous and repeat offenders. And this is where we're really focused on, because obviously any kind of crime is awful, and the victims of crime suffer, and their families suffer, and their lives are ruined. When it's committed by someone who the police have already arrested multiple times, there's an extra sense of frustration and devastation that Canadians feel, because they say this crime was avoidable. This could have been prevented if that offender was behind bars longer. That's what our tough 3 strikes and you're out law would do. Mandatory prison time of 10 years for anyone convicted of 3 serious offenses. I think Canadians support that. I believe that's a pragmatic solution to a problem that the Liberals have caused.
Do you see signs that the government is listening to you? Is that conversation happening behind the scenes with you and Stephen McKinnon, for instance, about areas where there might be room to compromise, work together?
Well, it's early days. We did have some success in the spring of improving on some aspects of Liberal legislation. They tried to exempt themselves from the Conflict of Interest in Lobbying Acts with their Bill C-5. We forced those changes in. They accepted that. My counterpart on the government side, we have productive conversations, but we really do have to wait and see. I will say on the general sense of, do I see a willingness for Liberals to embrace conservative ideas? Absolutely.
I know, but
they basically ran on them in the last election
that sort of
campaign,
brings me to the point I was going to make at the beginning. That is kind of problematic for you too, right? If you see them moving forward on housing, we'll see whether houses get built, okay? Major project office, we'll see whether those projects get done, an LNG pipeline at least. If they start to embrace these sort of more right-of-center ideas, to your point, conservative ideas, but done differently, I take the point that you wouldn't do them the same way, and bail is another example. Does that not create a problem for the Conservative Party in terms of distinguishing yourself? Because that's also the thing that you have to do inside the House of Commons.
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I believe what I would say is, first of all, done differently is all the difference in the world. We want to see major projects built because investors want to invest in Canada, that they see a stable and predictable path to get projects approved. That's how it was in Canada for decades up until this Liberal government. Their solution is to give the Prime Minister the power of selective enforcement, and he gets to decide, he gets to pick from a list which projects go forward.
Well, the project's office does first, and then I guess
he appointed them, he sets the criteria for them, and we don't believe that companies with the right government lobbyist should get the green light. We believe that the criteria should apply to everybody. So that is all the difference in the world. We're not going to restore that confidence in the Canadian economy if companies and investors think that they have to curry favor with a government. And we've already seen that. $50 billion plus have left Canada in direct investment since Mark Carney has been Prime Minister. So he's off to a terrible start.
Yeah, although this office has just been opened, so we'll see.
He promised to move at unimaginable speeds, and what has he done? There's over 30 projects on the impact assessment list, and he's plucked 5 of them off, many of which were already started. Or there's nothing new there. There's nothing really groundbreaking. Certainly nothing that's going to get that $50 billion of investment that's fled under his administration.
One last question about the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, who this past week has said that he's kind of annoyed at the anti-American sentiments by Canadians. He particularly seemed offended by the idea of a trade war, the language that ministers are using. What do you make of those comments that the U.S. ambassador doesn't seem to get that Canadians would be upset, personally upset at what is happening here?
Yeah, I have to. I haven't seen exactly what he has said, so I don't know if I'll respond specifically to that. But I'll just say that anytime a foreign country, no matter what the country is, starts raising the idea of annexation, of course Canadians are going to react negatively to that. And I was so proud, as someone who has been a proud Canadian my whole life and celebrated all that Canada has stood for. It's great to see so many people who up until a few years ago might not have shared in that Canadian pride rallying under the flag. So of course Canadians are going to respond in a patriotic way. We are different, we are distinct. I don't like to define Canada in the negative. I like to define Canada in the positive. We're more than just not being American. We have a proud history. We've been a force for good in the world for over 150 years. We've got this unique story of French and English and First Nations coming together, and I think that's something to be very proud of. And anytime any country out of the blue slaps tariffs or starts raising the specter of annexation, of course Canadians are going to respond positively on the patriotic side, but then also we're going to be upset and at being attacked like that.
We'll leave it there. Mr. Scheer, nice to see you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We need to make that generational investments in order to bring, to be less dependent, more resilient, and bring prosperity across our nation.
He's made some big ticket spending announcements in line with the previous Liberal government. I don't believe that that's what he promised Canadians that he would do during the election campaign.
The Minister of Finance and the Conservative House Leader there from our interviews talking about the budget, the state of federal finances. And so that's the question. What will they be, and will the Conservatives buy into it? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Aaron Wherry, senior writer for CBC here in Ottawa. Ryan Tumilty, a Toronto Star reporter. And Gary Mason, a columnist for the Globe and Mail. He's in Vancouver. Ryan, I'll start with you on this one. At least we're getting a budget because it's been a long time since we've had one. What did you take away from those conversations there? That phrase, generational investment, by the finance minister stood out for me. I don't know if that is a convincing phrase once you see a giant deficit and how that's going to figure into how we should read things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how Canadians take it when those numbers come down. Certainly no one during the pandemic blushed at $200, $300 million deficits, or $1 billion deficits rather. Yeah. When it was seen as worth it, Canadians didn't mind. And certainly, I don't know if they'll see it as worth it in this moment when we're being attacked by the U.S., when we're under this trade fight. But then there's a pressure on proving that you're spending that money well. You know, all of the good that might be done by this money will be discounted if, you know, Canadians find out about another ArriveCan type situation, you know, so it'll be a political tightrope for the government.
And Gary, the intent behind what the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister want to do is to reduce operational spending and invest to create growth inside the economy. How do you think they will manage to do that and explain that to Canadians?
I don't know. I think, you know, the problem is you have an economy that is continuing to contract because of, you know, the measures by the United States. So, I mean, that really creates a lot of instability in terms of what is our fiscal situation right now as they're trying to create a budget. So, I mean, it would be a bad time, in essence, to really start cutting back on spending because you have an economy that's contracting, which is only going to exacerbate your problems. On the other hand, Rosie, you have a debt situation that is now starting to become a big problem. I mean, the world is a very small place now, and you look around at other countries. The French government just fell because of their tremendous debt problems there. They have a debt to GDP ratio of 113% right now. The average in the G7 is 97%. Ours in Canada is somewhere around 75%. So you'd think, okay, maybe there's room to grow. On the other hand, if you have an economy that is starting to shrink, you know, you do not want to get into a really bad situation on the debt front. I keep going back, Rosie, to, okay, you can invest and spend government money on big projects and that sort of thing. But until the federal government starts attacking the root causes of the problems here, like our taxation problems. I mean, we tax income in Canada to a far greater extent than a lot of our peer nations. The red tape that exists in this country, the regulatory hurdles that companies have to go through here, it's ridiculous, again, compared to many of our peer nations. So those are the sorts of things that Mark Carney has to attack in a much bigger way. Finally, I'm going to say one other thing, Rosie, that in the last few years, the Trudeau government used immigration to goose the economy and mask very poor productivity numbers in this country. We don't have that now because of the unintended consequences of high immigration rates and the problems it caused elsewhere. So when you draw back on immigration, that also causes problems for the economy that Mark Carney is going to have to deal with.
I will say, just on the red tape issue, I do think the Major Projects Office, that's the intent, is to cut through some of that, because you're right. The flight of business, the flight of business investment from Canada is a problem too. Aaron, what do you make of how the government is already sort of telegraphing what this budget will do and how they're going to explain it to Canadians?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two issues. One is the technical issue of how you're going to divide up federal spending into operational versus capital. That'll be sort of something for economists and the parliamentary budget officer. And then I think, you know, beyond that, there is going to be this larger issue of how big is the deficit. But, you know, that's going to be paired with some cuts. This federal government is moving forward, it seems, with pretty aggressive cuts in what they have termed operational spending. And if that means that, you know, groups across the country or organizations are losing funding, the government's going to have to explain why that's necessary or prudent, or why they can't afford to spend money on those things at the same time as they're running what could be an even bigger deficit. And, you know, I think there's something to be said for the way the government is at least talking about changing the way they present the figures, insofar as they may be able to make the case that the only reason, or the primary reason, there's a deficit is because the money is going to, you know, productive things that grow the economy. But if it's also paired with austerity in select sectors, you're going to get into some tough conversations about why are we spending money there? Why don't we have money for this? And I think that's going to kind of present sort of conflict on sort of two fronts for the Liberals this fall.
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem with budgets, right? You do disappoint people at some point. Whether Canadians care about the size of the deficit or not, I don't know. Ryan, obviously the Conservatives aren't going to show their cards. It would be very surprising to me if they supported the budget. I'm not sure that they will go that far. There may be other pieces of legislation like bail where it's easier. But I wonder what opens up for them from the budget. You know, where can they criticize and attack the government?
I mean, I think their attack line is going to be the size of the deficit. I think you heard Andrew Scheer starting to talk and set that ground up already. Certainly the government is going to be doing things that the Conservatives have called for before. And, you know, investing in ports, in LNG projects, it's kind of hard for the Conservatives to criticize that, but I'm sure they will, because I'm sure this deficit number is going to be quite large. You know, the 60 billion, 100 billion starts to add up to real money at a certain point. And I'm sure the Conservatives are going to be quite critical of it. And I don't see, given that Pierre Poilievre has to face his own party in January in a leadership review, I really just don't see him voting for a Liberal budget now. Yeah.
It will be complicated, though, Gary, as Ryan points out, for the Conservatives to oppose measures in the budget that they agree with and then not support it, let's say, because the deficit is too big, or they don't support the ideology that is being pushed in the budget itself.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that there's a way to do both. I think there's a way to criticize it and support it at the same time. Yeah. I mean, let's face it, Rosie. I mean, who wants to bring the government down and force an election over this budget? I mean, I can't imagine. You know, I can't see anybody wanting to do that. So, I mean, there's going to be support for this budget. It's going to happen, whether it comes from the Conservatives, the NDP, whatever. I mean, it's almost a moot point. So, but you know, I think the Conservatives have every right to criticize this budget, and if the deficit is, you know, sky high and way beyond what Mark Carney suggested it was going to be, then that's legitimate criticism, and I think they're on solid ground to do that.
Last minute to you, Aaron.
Yeah, I think if I can be optimistic for a second, I think it's possible to get that coming out of this budget, it's really going to crystallize sort of the state of federal finances and what is potentially required in this moment for Canada. I think if the Carney government, you know, is as aggressive about cuts as they seem to be, and they still can't balance the budget, I think that leads to a larger conversation about what exactly is needed to fund the things that we seem to need to want to do coming out of this. Yeah. So I live in hope of a smarter and more nuanced conversation going forward.
Well, so do I. Let's end on that cheery note for a Sunday. Aaron Wherry, Gary Mason, Ryan Tumilty. Hope you'll come back, Ryan. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your days. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rosie.
Thanks.